Hey guys, I hope you're all doing really well. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. It's different from what I had planned as well. So we are going off script on this video. Basically it was just a synchronicity of events where it's extremely hot here as well as extremely stormy. And the power keeps sort of blipping off and on, and it's impossible for me to reference my notes to do the video that I was going to do. But also, I just happened to have a sort of inspiration for a different subject for a video. So we're going to go completely off script today, which we may end up finding to be highly regrettable. So I apologize for that. I usually script my videos extremely thoroughly to make sure that I'm careful about what I say, that I'm saying things in the best possible way to bring you guys the best possible information, because I really want you guys to succeed and to comprehend what we're talking about. But today I don't think it will matter too much. I hope that by not having a script, this video is still coherent and enjoyable. We are in a different location as well. Like I said, it's extremely hot and the power keeps going sort of just on and off. So it's extremely hot, so I apologize for that. I'm sure I look curly and sweaty at the same time. But anyway, so today, the subject that I was really inspired to talk about, it sort of came about through several different things. So it was partly conversations that I've had with writers recently about whether they can do certain things or why some writers can do certain things that they've been told not to do, and what to do in situations that are particularly tricky when it comes to what we call rules or requirements of fiction writing. The other reason that this has been on my mind specifically is because I have been working on a novel for a long time. If you're on my Patreon, especially if you're on my Patreon Discord, then you probably already know that I've been writing a novel for an extremely long time, about 6 years. Maybe that's not an extremely long time, depends on how you think about it, but it's been a while. It's been a percentage of my life at this point that I've been working on this novel. It's probably actually coming up on 7 years. And I'm coming down the home stretch. So I'm coming down the home stretch with this novel. Don't get too excited about news. There probably won't be any real news about it for a few months at the very least, but I am coming down the home stretch with that. And I do want to take you guys on my journey with that towards trying to get an agent, trying to get published, all of that. Whether or not it happens, if it may not go according to plan or in the most ideal way, but I do want to bring you guys along on that journey as well in the future. But having not finished, but coming down the home stretch, starting to finish this book, my brain just immediately wants a new challenge. And that's sort of how, I don't know, that's just sort of how I am. My brain sort of like finishes one thing and it wants to immediately start on a new challenge. So over the last year, as I've been wrapping up working on this book, I've had an increased interest in visual art. So an interest in drawing, painting, learning, Procreate, things like that. And this has nothing to do with the channel. Don't worry, it's not going to become an art channel. I'm just segueing here. So because of that, I've been consuming more content about visual art. And what really brought these two ideas together, people asking about writing rules and people asking about visual art, is that coming into something as a beginner, so coming into visual art as a beginner in my mid-30s, it's hard. You feel like you're constantly wondering, why do I have to do something a certain way? Or why am I told constantly, I have to do this thing and the shadows have to be this way and, people have to be drawn in a certain way and the proportions are a certain way and all this, all these rules, all of these restrictions. And it feels very off at times because you feel like you see other people creating art and the art that they're creating, it doesn't follow these rules. Often it does follow the rules, but often it doesn't. So we have a sort of a mixed outcome. We have art that follows most of the rules, but not some. We have art that seems to follow none of the rules, but maybe it does follow the rules and we just aren't at a level yet where we can see it. But regardless, it brings up all these questions about why do I have to do something a certain way? What's the point? What's the point of rules when we're talking about art, when we're talking about creativity? Why are there these restrictions at all? And why I think this is such an important topic is because we might look at someone's work and we might say that they succeeded and they didn't follow whatever rule. And that's entirely true. Fiction often breaks rules. We see many films, especially modern films, we see, I think lately we've seen a great increase in more surrealist films or just odd films that don't maybe follow rules that we would have set up previously. And we see that, of course, in novels as well, but with films, we're all more familiar with it. But for example, we have A24 films. Everybody pretty much knows like about A24 films, and that they're very different. They feel very different. The vibe is different, and a lot of the time we might say we don't really see the structure in the same way, or we don't see it following rules. Like perhaps we don't see it setting up rules for the antagonist in the same way. It can be very abstract and surrealist with bizarre things happening seemingly out of nowhere, and they don't follow the rules that we've always been told that you know fiction needs to set up a rule two times or three times so that we understand how things work, and that things need to follow and be consistent with rules, but we don't see that in certain pieces of fiction. And the reason that these rules are so difficult to comprehend is because the rules are not there to restrict you. The rules are not there to tell you what you can't do. The rules are there to help you bring your vision to life. They're there to help facilitate what you are trying to achieve. And that's why in every type of art, whether we're talking about visual art or writing or music or anything, we're always told to learn the rules before you break the rules, understand the rules, and then you can subvert them later on. But I think sometimes we don't always understand what this is even talking about. What does this even mean? What do you mean we have to learn it to break it? If I can break it, why don't I just break it now? You know, why do I have to learn something that's so hard to learn and so frustrating to learn if later you're going to turn around and say, well, you don't have to always follow these rules. And the reason is that you have to understand not just the rule, not just this thing, this law chiseled into stone that you have to have the first plot point at 20 to 25%, that has to happen. It's less so to learn it as a law. It's more so to learn why it's a rule. What is it accomplishing? Why do we have that? What is achieved by following that? Most of us have a certain thing that we want to achieve that's maybe a little bit more in alignment with each other. So, for example, maybe the vast majority of people writing fiction hope that it will sell pretty well. They hope that they'll have a fairly wide audience, that they'll be able to sell it, you know, at least to 10,000 people. The average is about 10,000. We want to at least appeal to 10,000 people. And most of us dream of something a lot bigger than that. So most of us are hoping that we will appeal to 100,000 people or 500,000 people. We want to have a bestseller. We want to have a book that's really widely enjoyed. That's definitely not everyone's objective. I would not say personally that that's my objective, but it's an understandable objective, and a lot of writers have that objective of appealing to a wide audience. Typically, a wide audience is going to enjoy well-structured fiction because it's similar to things that we've experienced before. We understand, we've all, as consumers, sort of acquired that sort of hero's journey as something that we intrinsically understand. So when something doesn't follow that, we may feel like, I don't really like that, or it may be very polarizing. Like, again, something surrealist, something like the A24 movies, we might say is very polarizing. Some people hated one of them and loved a different one, and some people hate all of them, and some people love all of them. So it's very polarizing, and we might not want our work to be polarizing. We might want our work to appeal to a certain audience, for example, sci-fi readers, fantasy readers, but we probably don't want our work to be polarizing, as in we don't want some people to hate it and some people to love it. We're looking to get most people who like a certain thing to like our work. Because of that, there are certain rules that we would follow to make that work exciting and well-paced and interesting and entertaining. But that's not the only objective in one piece of work or for everyone. So for some people, that's not the goal at all. Like I said, I wouldn't say for me that my goal is specifically to sell as many copies as possible. For me, it's more I want to achieve something specific that I have in mind for this book. And that's important to me. It's important to my vision and what I want. I have a real clear concept of what I'm looking to achieve. when we want to appeal to a wide audience, though, we need to take that into consideration, to what that wide audience likes and what they're looking for. But even within that work, say we have something that's pretty commercial, it may still deviate from the rules in certain capacities at certain times because it's trying to create a different effect, a different impact. And just because you're not following a rule doesn't mean the work is automatically not commercial. There's a degree of rules we can break where we eventually reach a point where it's not commercial anymore. We eventually reach a point where it's not widely, or it's unlikely to be widely enjoyed, but we can break some rules and still stay within those expectations and still be entertaining. In fact, some wildly popular fiction of all types has broken rules and has subverted those expectations, and people absolutely love them, and they have hit it big in the mainstream. So it isn't this black and white thing. But what's really important to understand about rules, and let's take, for example, a really good example of this, and this came up recently on Patreon as well, is filtering. So filtering is when you filter through the senses of the character. So for example, instead of just stating a scent or a sight or a smell, you add in the filtering word of he smelled, she felt, etc. So the saw, felt, smelled, tasted, those were the filtering words. It came up on Patreon where someone was asking about that in regards to what if something isn't on screen. So what if someone so what if a situation comes up where in the narration we want to say that the character heard something that was from another room, for example. And they were asking how we can avoid filtering. And we certainly can. We can make the choice to avoid filtering in that situation, and that's completely fine. And we may want to do that for various reasons. But the point of avoiding filtering is to not create that distance. So filtering creates distance. It creates a separation between the reader and the character. We don't want that separation, which is in most cases, in the majority of cases, we don't want that separation. We're trying to create a sense of almost that the reader's embodying the character. In that situation, we don't want filtering because we don't want to create that layer of distance. We just want to describe things without filtering it through the character's emotions. However, there are situations like, for example, something is happening off screen where it makes sense to say, she heard something, he heard something, because it's logical, it's simple, and it makes sense. We can't necessarily explain that the sound of what was heard to describe what happened. So for example, say, in this case, I believe what happened was the character heard someone coming home. We can say they heard the door open, they heard footsteps. It's a little complicated, and it would be a lot simpler to just say, she heard her husband come home, or she heard so-and-so come home from the other room. We don't have to follow really, really rigidly to the rules. So that's to segue into a bigger reason not to follow the rules. So that's a pretty small, simple explanation of why you might not follow a rule. A more interesting scenario would be a situation where you want to create distance. So maybe you don't want the reader to embody this character that closely. Maybe you want to create a sense of separation. The filtering, then, you might include it naturally as you write, as you work on your book, because it works with what you're trying to do. It makes sense. You're trying to create a sense of distance. You might not be consciously thinking that that's what you're trying to do, but you may still naturally include that filtering because you understand that you are trying to create a sense of distance. Maybe the character feels distant from themselves. So maybe the character is perceiving things with a degree of separation from their own body. And so you want to include filtering to enhance that and to make a difference between a situation where they're feeling distant from their body and when they're feeling close from their body. So then you want to use filtering in that scenario. The point of these rules is to facilitate doing what you want to do, to help you facilitate the creation of the effect that you want to create in your work. And that's why in many videos I've talked about the importance of having a vision, of developing a vision. And a lot of us won't have a vision right away. So most of us, some of us are extremely fortunate, and we get these immense visions sort of automatically where we can kind of see how we want the whole thing to look and feel and the vibe, and we have this really well-developed idea. Most of us don't have that. Most of us needed to develop our vision over time. And I've talked about in a lot of videos developing your vision and clarifying your vision. And the reason that that's so important is because you can't comprehend how your work fits into the rules unless you understand what you're trying to achieve. It starts with understanding what what you're trying to accomplish, what effect you want to have. How do you want this book to feel? How do you want the reader to feel? How do you want this scene to be perceived? It's going to be very difficult to say, I have to always follow this rule, and to sort of write that into a law in your mind. It's going to be very difficult to say that and then create something that has the effect that you want, because often to create an effect, we have to subvert expectations. We have to subvert those rules. We have to go against what maybe we've been taught. And it's extremely important to be flexible in that way with the rules. But we can really only be flexible with the rules when we understand what they're there for and why we have them and what the point of them is. And so really the only thing that I wanted to say today, the message that I wanted to bring across today, is that writing rules are there for you. They're there for you to facilitate what you want to do, the same way that when we talk about visual art, those rules are there to help you facilitate what you want to accomplish. So, for example, we might say something like a rule for drawing, a rough rule for drawing might be that people are so many heads tall. We're not going to sit there and say, well, that means that I can't draw a character who has a big head. We see lots of characters that have big heads. We see big-headed cartoon characters because it's more aesthetically interesting. We see big-headed characters to create a comedic effect or to create a horror effect, to make it to look scary, to look uncanny. We don't have to follow the rule 100% of the time. It's not about creating a law, it's about helping you to create the effect that you want to create. And most people are trying to, in terms of visual art, they're trying to draw a character that looks like a real person, or maybe they're trying to draw a portrait of a real person. They want it to look like a real person. If you want it to look like a real person, then it has to be so many heads tall according to their age and male, female, etc. We don't have to follow those rules when that's not what we're trying to do. When we're not trying to make a person that feels like a real person, of course we can make their head bigger or smaller, or we can space their eyes farther apart, or we can exaggerate or eliminate a feature. We can make a person who has no nose or no mouth because we're trying to make something that looks weird or scary or creepy, or maybe we make the eyes huge because we want it to be cute. And I think in visual art, we understand that inherently. We understand inherently that we can subvert those rules because we're trying to create a certain effect. But in fiction, I think that we can get way more hung up on following the rules in a very literal way, that we can almost encode them as law, and we can't conceptualize not following them. But there are circumstances in every book that will not follow the rules. Every single book is going to have elements and moments, situations, characters that do not follow the rules. You may intentionally do something like, for example, set up a character arc and then not have the character actually have the arc. You may do that to create a specific effect that you want to create. Like I mentioned, you might use filtering because you intentionally want to create a sense of distance from the character. And that's fine. You just have to understand what you're trying to do. The problem with rules, with giving rules, and on this channel, of course, I am typically much more organized and much more rigid with things because I'm trying to explain what the rules are. But we have to understand that when we learn these rules, we're learning something that's going to be as widely applicable as possible to as many situations as possible, to what most people are trying to achieve. And most people are trying to achieve commercial fiction that has wide appeal with realistic seeming characters. And that might not be what you're trying to do, or it might be mostly what you're trying to do, and it might just be a little thing here and there where you want to go against a certain structural rule or against a certain writing rule. For example, maybe of a very childlike character, or a child character, or a character who just is childlike, and maybe they use a ton of adjectives, and you've read you shouldn't use 2-3 adjectives back to back, or you shouldn't use so many adjectives in a row in general. But that's in general. That's because most people are trying to write like an adult, and they're trying to write an adult character. I don't mean like an adult. I mean, you can write a childlike character like an adult would write, but I mean, you want to create a character who feels like an adult. And when you want to create a character who feels like an adult, you don't want to put something in that's going to feel like it's written for kids or that feels childlike, because it's not what you're going for. So I have rambled on about this long enough. I think you guys get the point that I'm trying to say, but I just wanted to encourage you guys to be flexible with the rules, because the rules are there to help facilitate what you want to do. They're not there to restrict you. And if you don't want to follow a rule, Think about why you don't want to follow it. Think about the effect that you're trying to create, because there is a vast difference between not following a rule because you don't understand it, not following a rule by accident, and not following a rule because it doesn't work with what you're trying to achieve. So anyway, that is all I wanted to say today. I hope this wasn't too miserable of a video since it was unscripted. I am working on a video about editing, which actually turned into, I think, 3 different videos about editing, so that will be coming soon. And I still am working on the flat arc structure video, and eventually the negative arc structure video. It'll be a few weeks before any of those are remotely close to done, but I am working on all of them. I hope you guys are all doing really, really well. I will see you again soon, and in the meantime, happy writing, guys.